I'm Liz Faublis, and this is Currents. Believe it or not, it was less than 3 weeks ago Pope Benedict made history, becoming the first pope in nearly 600 years to resign.
Ad conditionem certam perveni, viris meas, in gravescente etate.
The Holy Father announced his decision on February 11th during a consistory of cardinals, with the resignation going into effect yesterday at 8 p.m. Rome time. Back here in Brooklyn, on the day Benedict made the announcement, our news director Ed Wilkinson caught up with Bishop DiMarzio, who shared his experience on finding out about the resignation.
I heard the news about 6 o'clock this morning. I was on the treadmill, and Monsignor Harrington came down and said, "The Pope has resigned." So I was surprised, but not shocked, because I guess he had said he would do this if he felt he couldn't carry on. So that's what happened.
How unusual is it for a pope to resign his
Well,
office?
it didn't happen in 600 years, and it was a different situation then. The man who was elected pope was not even a cardinal. It was a monk, a very holy man. But once he got into office, after 2 months, he decided he couldn't do this, so he resigned. But this is a completely different situation. It's, I think, recognition by the Holy Father that there is the possibility of resignation, and that since he feels he cannot physically keep up with the responsibility, he has resigned. So it's a little different.
Now, the reason he stated was because of age and his inability to maybe carry out some of the some of the work. Is there any reason to believe that the Pope is ill, or is this just a decision made because of old age?
I don't think so. I mean, no more than, him just advanced age, and they're not able to walk up the aisle of St. Peter's. They've been putting him on a platform and wheeling him up and things like that. Indication was walking with a cane. So you could see that he's in pain and not able to function that well.
What does this say about a man like Benedict XVI, that he's willing to walk away from a position that many would regard as very prestigious?
Clearly, he's a humble man. There's no question about that. And I think his humility would allow him to relinquish what some might see as a position of power. But he was really looking into service. I mean, all the things he's written about it, and clearly that he sees the service of Peter as one of service and not of power, not of authority, but of service. So again, I'm not surprised that he could find himself capable of doing this.
He was particularly close to John Paul II. Do you think that he saw that when John Paul II had his own physical ailments, that the Pope was not able to carry out his office in the way that he could? You think that had any effect on him?
I'm sure it did. I mean, we all saw it, the whole world saw it. And we, felt so bad for the Holy Father, John Paul II, Blessed John Paul II, struggling to carry on, which was next to impossible. So for so long, too, it wasn't a question of a couple of months, it was a couple of years. So I guess maybe that influenced his decision.
And we'll hear more from Bishop DiMarzio later in the show. As for Pope Benedict's future,
it's a retirement home being prepared to fit an ex-pope. A simple ex-convent, ideal for prayer and contemplation. A change for a man who for the last 8 years has served as the spiritual leader to more than 1 billion Catholics the world over. And it's a brave new world for an institution where most popes have died on the job. There hasn't been an ex-pope in almost 600 years, and with Benedict XVI just days away from retirement, there are all sorts of details, great and small, that need to be worked out. It's still unclear what his title will be, perhaps Bishop Emeritus of Rome. His public role has yet to be defined. Vatican watcher Giacomo Gagliazzi suggests the best way to avoid problems is for Benedict to serve discreetly as an advisor to his successor.
Ovviamente però in un nascondimento al mondo.
If he's not hidden from the world, he says, he could become like an alternative reigning pope, and that could disorient the faithful who are already disturbed and upset by Benedict's resignation.
Ho avuto il dono di poter seguire questo Papa.
The papal retirement plan is fairly simple. Reports in the Italian media say he'll receive a monthly pension of €2,500. It's around $3,400. Room, board, and domestic help will be provided by the Vatican. Taylor Raniero Mancinelli has known Benedict for more than 25 years. He explains that the ex-pope will wear a robe along these lines, but a different color. I think, he tells me, he'll wear simple black like a simple priest, busy with prayer and writing books. At least he'll have a room with a view. Ben Wiedemann, CNN, Vatican City.
And with the chair of St. Peter being vacated, the Vatican ceases most operations with a few exceptions.
As soon as the Pope dies or officially resigns, all functions within the Vatican stop for a period called the sede vacante until a new Pope is chosen. But under an apostolic constitution for the papal vacancy, only 3 positions remain active. The first and most important is a Camerlengo, currently held by Italian Cardinal Tarcisio Bertone. He will temporarily take control of the Vatican's everyday affairs. However, for more important matters, usually brought to the Pope, they must be presented to the College of Cardinals during general congregations, which take place every day leading up to the Conclave. Afterward, between them, there are 3 cardinals in addition to and led by the Camerlengo that form a particular congregation. They execute the decision taken by the general congregation formed by all the cardinals. The second position is the major penitentiary held by Portuguese Cardinal Manuel Monteiro de Castro. His task includes the absolution of major sins, such as priests who break their seal of confession or granting indulgences. The third position is the Vicar General of Rome, Cardinal Agostino Vallini. As the Pope usually attends to the entire Catholic Church, he appoints a Vicar General to take care of the faithful in Rome. The pastoral work continues even when there is no Bishop of Rome, the Pope. During the papal vacancy, no laws can be created or changed. Any matters that can be held off will be done so until the new Pope takes the helm of the Catholic Church.
Coming up, men studying for the priesthood share their thoughts on Benedict's pontificate. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Liz Faublas. The news that rocked the world, the resignation of Pope Benedict. American seminarians studying in Rome experienced firsthand the excitement following the announcement.
We just finished finals, so I was on kind of a pilgrimage vacation up around Turin. And we just finished lunch, and we were walking outside, and one of the guys in my group was, he heard just a little bit, there will be, or something about new election for the Pope. And we're like, oh, I wonder what that was, but we're thinking, oh, you probably caught that out of context or something. But then later that evening, we went to Mass, and at Mass, there were all these serious, heavy parts of like the intercessory prayers. We pray for the Pope in this hard time and this great decision he's made, and we pray for the church and all the struggles that are going on, and we're like, what in the world is going on? Oh my gosh, we definitely missed something today. And then just after Mass, we were told that the Pope has resigned, and it's just like, wow.
It's interesting, you see the last 2 popes, you see Blessed John Paul II, who started this new wave, this new evangelization, a re-evangelization of the church. And you see Benedict XVI picking up that same charge and leading it in areas of new media and areas in which the church knows that the gospel message needs to be heard. And I guess my hope is that the future Pope will pick up that same charge in the new evangelization and carry the message, the gospel message, to many people who have heard it once, but may need to hear it again.
When he was elected, there was a lot of talk about, oh no, the German shepherd, the real one who cuts down on crime is coming in. But I think through his papacy, he's shown that He's just, as he said, a humble servant in the vineyard of the Lord. And especially with his resignation, we see just how humble he is, that he accepted the papacy out of humble service to God because it was something that he didn't want. And I think he resigned in the same way, out of humble service to God, knowing that this is what is best for the church.
I think the Holy Father in the upcoming years is going to have to continue to work on a reform in the Curia, the Roman Curia. He'll have to deal with the reality of the sex abuse crisis, and he's going to have to work to further the faith in third world countries as well. I served in Africa over the summer and spent 5 weeks there, and it was a really powerful experience, but the people there are so hungry for the faith, and so I think that's another initiative that the Holy Father will have to take up, is to reach out to the people in third world countries.
On the day Pope Benedict made his announcement, our news director Ed Wilkinson asked Bishop DiMarzio about the legacy of Benedict XVI.
Clearly his intellectual capacity to analyze, to preach, to write, that will be a great legacy he will leave the church. He's clarified so many things, and his work as a head of the Congregation of Doctrine of the Faith will also be a heritage.
And it was just a few years ago that Benedict XVI was here in New York, and we had a chance to welcome him and say goodbye to him at Kennedy Airport. Do you have any stories, or how would you remember Benedict from that visit?
Well, you know, we saw him coming into Kennedy and going out of Kennedy. We had quite a nice departure ceremony in the hangar. We had several thousand people there, and it's just this guy was tired, you could see, after the trip, but he was just very patient, taking all the pictures with everyone and looking at, and wanting to know about who was there, very considerate even to the very end.
When we return, we will have your guide to the days and the weeks ahead. Welcome back. Now that Pope Benedict's resignation has taken effect, the cardinals of the church are gathering in Rome. 118 of them will be electing the next pope in what is known as a conclave.
As the princes of the church, only cardinals have the exclusive responsibility to choose a successor to the pope, but only the ones under 80 can take part in the election.
It's a very small group composed of guys who know one another fairly well for the most part. So it's much more analogous to, say, the election of a department chair in a university.
The Sistine Chapel, where the conclave has to take place, must be sealed off, and the insides checked for any hidden recording devices. For the entire conclave, the cardinals are required to stay at the Vatican's Domus Sanctae Martyr. They have very good service. It's not a 5-star hotel, but it's very comfortable. Cardinals are not allowed to communicate with the outside world or have access to the media. They could be excommunicated if they do. The conclave starts with a Pro Eligendo Papa Mass, asking for God's help in electing the new pope. From there, they'll head to the Sistine Chapel and take an individual oath of secrecy and to not help any outsiders trying to intervene in the conclave. Then they start voting.
In many ways, the voting is the most complicated and time-consuming element of this process.
In order for a cardinal to become pope, he's required to get 2/3 of the votes. On the first day, they'll vote only once, but after that, twice in the morning and twice in the afternoon. There will be a pause for prayer and discussion each time after 13 ballots if no cardinal gets the 2/3 majority. To find out how they vote, Mexico's Cardinal Barragan shares his experience from 2005.
Encima de esa línea, había que poner el nombre.
On the line of each ballot, we must write the name of the cardinal we choose, but in capital letters and in a way that no one can tell who's voting.
No se identificara de ninguna manera quién votaba.
Each papal elector then walks up the altar of the Sistine Chapel, folds his ballot twice, and places it in this plate. After affirming it's his, he drops it into a receptacle. 3 cardinals whose name were chosen at random will tally the votes individually.
El primer cardenal que se encontraba al
The first cardinal on the far left will silently read the ballot. He passes it to the second, who reads it silently. He passes it to the third, who reads it out loud.
sin pronunciarlo. se lo pasaba al tercero, que lo veía y lo pronunciaba.
The ballots will be strung together using a needle to avoid double counts. 3 other cardinals will double-check the tallies to ensure the counts are correct. And after that, all cardinals will turn in their notes, which will be burned along with the final ballot tallies.
Cuando se quemaba incienso,
When you burn incense, it produces white smoke, and you can call that the fumata bianca. When you burn the ballots where the candidate's name was written, then that smoke will usually be black.
Once a candidate has crossed that 2/3 majority, the Dean of the College of Cardinals, or, of course, what happened last time was the Dean of the College of Cardinals got elected, so it would be the Vice Dean, would come to him and say, do you accept your canonically valid election as the successor of St. Peter? And once he says in Italian, accetto, meaning I accept, then from that moment, he becomes the Pope.
The Cardinal Dean, or highest-ranking Cardinal Bishop, will also ask the newly elected Pope, and therefore Bishop of Rome, what name he would like to take on. The new Pope will change into one of 3 best-fitting white tunics already prepared for his election. After greeting his peers, he then prepares for the apostolic blessing Urbi et Orbi at St. Peter's Square, marking the end of the conclave.
And once a new pope is elected, he may have his work cut out for him, according to one Vatican watcher.
The expectations that this would be a pontificate in which the Vatican bureaucracy, the Roman Curia, was deeply and thoroughly reformed have not been met. Things are in fact worse now, in my view, than they have been in perhaps 40 years. Everyone who does not have a vested interest in the status quo understands that a major task in the early going of the next pontificate is going to be not only to change structure, but to change attitude. The Roman Curia exists to give effect to the will of the Bishop of Rome. That's the only reason it exists. If being the universal pastor of the Church means to be an evangelizing missionary, then the Roman Curia has to think of itself as part of that papal evangelical mission, and it has to contribute to that rather than being an impediment to it, which frankly, in some instances, indeed perhaps many instances, it is today. This Curia needs to be thoroughly internationalized. It needs to be detached from what has become, according to one of my Italian friends, a deeply rooted culture of corruption in Italy as a whole, which has a way of seeping over the boundary between Italy and Vatican City. And if the next pope does not wish to take this on himself, which in many respects he probably shouldn't do, it's not the job of the pope to move slots around on an organization chart, but he needs to hire somebody. He needs to have a Secretary of State, a Chief of Staff, or Sostituto as he's called here, who can take this on and will have his authority and his backing to do this properly.
All right, stay with us. There's more currents ahead. Of the cardinals eligible to vote in the upcoming conclave, more than half were elevated by Pope Benedict. Among that number is Washington Archbishop Cardinal Donald Wuerl. Ahead of the conclave, the cardinal spoke with Catholic News Service about the past and the future.
I have a personal, just a wonderful experience as the synod ended. You know, every day the Pope sits there and listens, and I had the opportunity to be that close to him because of my responsibilities, but as it ended, I will always cherish that he made it a point of saying to me he was pleased with the process of the synod and he was pleased with its outcome. And that said to me that we all in that room were picking up on something that he and his predecessor had highlighted. There's a real need today to look at the world and see that the challenge is a huge one, and we just can't do business as usual. We just can't keep a status quo. We have to find ways to reach, especially the young people. I was very, very alert to the discussions that were coming from Africa, Asia. One would have thought a little differently, perhaps, at least I would have, in terms of the secularism. And those bishops were saying, those cardinals were saying, secularism is affecting us just as much as it's affecting you, because what happens in Europe, what happens in North America impacts all of us. So I think that's going to be something that'll be weighing heavily on the hearts and minds of the cardinals in the conclave. The work ahead of us has been outlined for us by Benedict to address the needs today of the proclamation of the good news in a way that it'll be heard. The task is going to require an enormous amount of physical energy, because he described it in terms of traveling, all the modern media, and how it works today. The church has to be able to be in that world. And I think I heard the Holy Father saying in his declaration of his intention to retire that he felt he didn't have the energy. The one thing he did was set in motion for us where we need to go, what we need to do. It's very clearly outlined. His pontificate has highlighted that. The new evangelization is where we need to be.
And as we conclude tonight's show and prepare for the next chapter in the history of the Church, we take a final look back at Pope Benedict's trips to the Americas. And that is all for tonight. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Liz Faublas. We leave you with scenes from Pope Benedict's trip to New York with 60,000 faithful at Yankee Stadium. Thank you for watching and have a good night.